Everyone expected Homelander to die like a god. The biggest fight, the most explosive finale, 5 seasons of build-up all pointing toward one inevitable conclusion that this man was going to be impossible to kill. And when he finally died, it was going to shake the world. And then the boys killed him quietly, in the Oval Office, without his powers. But here's the thing, that wasn't a disappointment. That was the most humiliating, most deliberately constructed death the show could have written for him. And once you understand why, once you see what the writers were actually saying, you realize it was always going to end exactly like this. Because here's what people are missing. The Boys wasn't building toward Homelander's death for 5 seasons. It was building toward this specific death, this one. Exposed in front of the exact people who'd spent 5 seasons trying to prove he was never what he claimed to be. The show wasn't asking how you kill the most powerful man alive. It was asking something far more interesting, something far more disturbing. What happens to a man like Homelander when you take away the only thing that ever made him feel real? To understand the answer, you have to understand what Kimiko's new ability actually represented, because the show didn't give her a power upgrade just for the action sequence. It gave her the specific ability to drain soups. Think about what that actually is. Not a weapon that hurts Homelander. A mechanism that makes him human. That takes everything separating him from ordinary people and makes it disappear. And here's what's actually happening beneath the surface of that scene. Homelander's powers were never tools. They were walls. The reason he could stand in front of crowds that feared him and smile, the reason he could stare down presidents and generals and every military apparatus on the planet without flinching. Remove the walls, and there's nothing left to hide behind. And here's where it gets dark. Homelander's deepest fear was never death. Plenty of people fear death. Homelander feared something far more specific, far more personal than that. He feared being ordinary. He feared that if you stripped away the cape and the laser eyes and the invulnerability, there'd be nothing underneath worth looking at. No self, no substance. Just an empty room where a person was supposed to be. And that fear wasn't irrational. It was accurate. Homelander was raised in a lab, not given a childhood, given a controlled environment designed to produce a weapon. He never built an identity outside of what his powers made him. He never had to. So by the time the show starts and we're watching him demand worship from massive crowds, threaten the world when he doesn't get what he wants, perform strength for millions of people, what we're actually watching is someone constructing an entire personality out of the only material he was ever given. Power, fear from others, the protection of being untouchable. Take that away, and there was never anything else there. Homelander never wanted power. He wanted protection. And that's what the finale finally proved, not with a speech, not with exposition, but by literally stripping it all away and showing us what was left. Nothing. But here's the part nobody is talking about enough. Because the death doesn't fully land until you understand what Ryan being in that room actually meant. Think about what Homelander's entire emotional architecture in the final season was built around. Not Vought, not political control, not even survival. Ryan. Ryan was the proof, the one piece of evidence Homelander kept reaching for that he was capable of being loved, that he was real in a way the crowds and the worship never actually made him feel. He kept Ryan close, not because he was a good father, but because Ryan was the only mirror that ever showed him something he could stand to look at. And Ryan walked into that room and helped bring him down. Strip away the action framing, and that moment is devastating in a very specific way. A son watching his father die, choosing to be there, choosing the side that kills him. That's not a neutral act. That's a verdict. And it came from the only person in the world whose verdict actually mattered to Homelander. He didn't just lose his powers in that room. He lost the last thing that had ever made him feel like more than a performance. Now here's what I want you to pay attention to, because there's a moment just before the final confrontation that most people are going to scroll right past. Homelander is giving his address to the nation. Maximum control. The culmination of everything he'd been building toward, the political power, the public worship, the God finally speaking to his people on live television, and he gets triggered by one word, father. One word in the middle of a prepared speech, and he comes completely apart, goes off script, starts threatening the country he was supposed to be addressing. Think about what that moment is actually telling you. Even at the absolute peak of his power, even in the moment designed to prove he'd won the wound, was right there on the surface, unhealed, exposed, one word away from collapse. The man who performed godhood for millions couldn't get through a prepared speech without fatherhood breaking him. That's the show's final thesis statement on Homelander, delivered before Kimiko even lays a hand on him. The powers were never the point. The wound was always the point. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because a lot of people going into this finale wanted something epic. A death that matched the scale of what Homelander represented. 5 seasons of buildup, you want the payoff to feel enormous. I understand that. The explosion, the world-shaking moment, the death worthy of the mythology. But that ending would have been a lie. More than that, it would have given Homelander exactly what he always wanted, to matter on a grand scale. To be important enough that his ending shook the world. Even in death, to be a god. The boys denied him that. First, they took his powers, made him human. Made him exactly as killable as every single person he'd ever looked down at. Then Butcher finished it quietly. No spectacle, no final confrontation worthy of the legend, no death that matched the myth. Just consequences. The most humiliating thing you can do to someone who built their entire identity on being untouchable is to touch them. And the most humiliating ending for someone who spent 5 seasons trying to become a god is to die as nothing more than a man. He didn't die a monster. He died exposed. Here's what The Boys was actually saying, not just in the finale across 5 seasons, in every crowd scene and every private breakdown, in every moment Homelander performed strength for people who were too afraid to look away. Power without accountability doesn't create gods. It creates damage. It creates someone so weaponized, so fundamentally incapable of real intimacy, that the only way they know how to be loved is to make people afraid of what happens if they don't. That's not strength. That's the most elaborate defense mechanism ever constructed. And the finale's answer, stripping him powerless before killing him, is the show's final argument. Not just that he deserved to die, but that the version of him the world had been reacting to for 5 seasons was never real. The god was always a performance. The invulnerability was always a bluff. And underneath it was something smaller and sadder, and more uncomfortable than most people want to admit, because admitting it means confronting what we actually found compelling about him all along. Not the power, the fear, the thing underneath the monster that recognized something in us. The show didn't just kill Homelander in the finale, it proved a point about him. Homelander was never powerful, he was just terrified. And in the end, once the terror was placed back where it always belonged inside him, there was nothing left to sustain the illusion. He died the way he lived, afraid, just finally, without anything left to hide behind. And maybe that's the darkest part of all. Not that he died powerless, but that, even then, even stripped of everything, even reduced to nothing part of us still felt something watching it, because the show made us care about the wound before we ever hated the monster, and it knew exactly what it was doing the entire time. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Did this death give you what you were waiting for? Or did the boys owe Homelander something bigger?